Welcome to Anchored in Christ. A little different this time around as each of us are in 3 separate locations, but thanks to the wonders of technology, that's not a problem. And joining us today is our special guest, Pastor Joshua Schooping. My name is Doug Hanna. Your host is, of course, our co-host, Pastor Curt Hoover of Faith Lutheran Church in Thompson Station. We don't have guests every week, Pastor, so it's cool when we do. We'd like to do this more often. So I'm going to have you do the honors and introduce our guest and why he's our guest.
Right. So I met Pastor Shuping, well, a couple years ago now. I'm not sure how long, but you've now been an LCMS brother pastor over in the Arkansas area for all of that time. As I'm part of kind of an interview committee for pastors from other church traditions, and you come to us from the Orthodox background, and you were faithfully received into the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So welcome, by the way.
By the grace of God. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
So we wanted to talk about that.
We fondly remember that conversation.
Wow,
Yes.
that's cool. Yeah, that's good. You guys go back like that. Yeah.
Good. And we do not get that many. Well, I don't know that Christendom, especially North American Christendom, knows that much about Orthodoxy. It's kind of that quiet, ancient church. And so I'm fascinated with your story and want everybody to hear it.
I can tell you here in Nashville, a lot of people are fascinated with it for whatever reason. It seems to, at least in this town, it seems to be like I hear a lot about people that are going to Eastern Orthodoxy out of whatever tradition they've come in. So it's interesting, Pastor Joshua, you came the other way. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, well, one little thing is it maybe seems that more people will know about Eastern Orthodoxy than confessional Lutheranism soon. We don't want to be left in the dust. We have so much to offer, especially and above all the gospel and the proper distinction between the law and the gospel, which is just every day we're blessed to be able to stand in that security. But my journey began, let's see, I mentioned a little bit earlier before we came on that my son is 16 years old. So when my wife was pregnant, that was about 17 years ago, we were entering into the Christian faith. We had not, I had attended churches off and on since being a little boy, really since, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I was attending youth groups. And throughout high school, I was attending youth groups for sure, and Young Life, and would walk to church on Sundays to like a local non-denominational church about a mile away from my home. But I never really was a believer, but God surrounded me with good Christian friends. And so I grew up really hearing a lot about the love of Jesus, but very little doctrinal substance. And so that kind of put me at a crossroads as I grew older because nothing really made sense. And because there was where I was in some of these like lower evangelical contexts, there was often very thin explanation. So as I'm dealing with some of the complexities of my family life, as I'm dealing with some of the complexities of my social life, in high school and after, Christianity didn't really seem to have answers for that. It just seemed almost like something we'd just kind of close our eyes and whistle or something like that, and try to walk through life that way. And so for me, I still somehow had Christians. God just sent faithful Christians to my life, even into my mid-20s. I attended a church for a time that was an Emergent church. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Emergent church.
Yeah, I have, but set the terms of what that is, because it's kind of no longer a thing, is it?
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of gone away. I'm not entirely sure, but it was... Goodness, I wouldn't even really know how to characterize it in a way that someone...
I can use some shorthand here, and you see if this is if this scans or if this is off. So there was sort of a and what you're talking about, evangelicalism and kind of the empty calories that go with it. That's the phrase I like to use. It started just automatically causing people to go, wait, there has to be more to it than this. This has to be more than just the current marketing thing and the trends and the emotions. And so some people branched off into different ways of looking at it, and it was tapping into sort of they'd light candles. It would be a little slightly liturgical. It would be sort of hearkening back to the Reformation, but it would also still be very much in the modern realm, and it became quite popular, in particular among Reformed. I don't know, for about 5-10 years, about maybe 10-15 years ago, and then like we've talked about, it just sort of faded. So if there's anything you want to take away or add to that description, but that's essentially what it was, and it was really popular for a while.
Yeah, definitely an embrace of technology, and especially with what we would call contemporary worship, but with guitars, and not just, acoustic guitars where I was, and not just electric guitars, but, guitars with distortion pedals,
Right.
and, it was a full, it was a rock concert, and it happened to be oriented towards youth, and this was in Orlando. I grew up in the Central Florida area, and so this was geared towards, there was a pastor's son who was in his early 20s, and he was given like the latitude by his dad to like start like a youth emergent church thing for like 18 to like college something. And so they got together, and it ended up having like 800 youth on a Sunday evening.
Yeah, they always grow real fast because these are crowd-pleasing techniques. I'm already sounding so negative. I'm sorry. I don't mean to, but they really are kind of designed to, let's get the maximum amount of people and do what it takes to get them in here. And yeah.
No, actually, philosophically, I think it is sensualism. They really do try to appeal to what appeals to rock and roll, like what the appeal of rock and roll is to excite the emotions. And so when it excites the emotions, they don't typically order the soul as like mind, will, affections in terms of their anthropology of music. They typically try to address the emotions to try to make a person kind of excited about Jesus, and that typically is why like the theological content is low, and it's often more like maybe a TED talk, but like a TED talk light, motivational, and so it's really get excited about Jesus kind of thing.
Yeah, and that if you're anything like me, that got old. It just did, and boy, I careened around all kinds of different traditions. Was the journey out of evangelicalism to Eastern Orthodoxy and then into confessional Lutheranism a straight one, or did you also go from kind of place to place trying to find it?
Yeah, when when my wife and I, with our unborn son, were contemplating churches and investigating, I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, my BA in humanities in the history department at a local liberal college in Winter Park, Rollins College. I was doing the night school. I was already kind of in my second career at this point. I had spent a few years as a massage therapist. I did advanced therapeutic massage, did a lot of deep tissue work and myofascial release, things like that. And that was one of the things that moved me back into my BA, as I thought maybe I'd go into psychology. I have a fascination with the human mind, really the soul, and how to help people. And so as I was kind of studying in my humanities degree, my wife and I briefly attended a Reformed Baptist church. Christ had been kind of like really knocking on my door. We never became members at this church, but Christ was really knocking on my door, so to speak. And it was almost as if God had spoken to me, as I was terrified of being a father, and like, what do I do? And it was almost like the Lord was like, do you want to give him your best guess? Because I was very syncretistic at this point. That was one of the things about the emergent church movement. It's not very orthodox. There's not really a clear delineation of doctrine. And so I was very syncretistic. I had studied in my humanities time, and it just things from the Far East to the Far West, whether it was how far east can we go? We can go to like Zen Buddhism, to Chinese Taoism, to Indian Sikhism and Hinduism and Sufi Islam, and so as I was like kind of studying these things, I kind of like started to discover like that there's an Eastern Christian tradition. And so I wasn't really sure, well, what about this nice evangelist that I met at the used bookstore who was Reformed Baptist? And so he attended there for a while, sometimes would attend an Eastern Orthodox church. And what ended up being was I kind of absorbed a more of like the antipathy towards anything Western, and a fascination and respect for anything foreign, which was, an attitude kind of cultivated in a lot of pop culture today, pop intellectual culture.
Right, right. Pastor Curt, we got three different cats here in this conversation. So I have my journey and then I ended up here. Same for Pastor Shuping on a little different level and sooner. You're a lifer. You're a lifer in the Lutheran tradition, and I remark and find it remarkable how many times I describe some of this stuff to you, and you're just like, really? Like it must be odd for somebody, because you really have not known anything else in your faith.
No, but
life.
I'm fascinated by the story. I mean, I took certainly the missiology classes and studied other ways of thinking, including Christian other ways of thinking, and so I studied them and interviewed them and so forth, and got a feel for them. But that's what fascinated me about Pastor Shuping. We don't find many people from that angle. So
do you? Pastor Curt, as you listen to these, I mean, and we've talked about this before, so at this point it may no longer be a surprise to you, but as you hear the descriptions of what's going on here, and all of what he said has been pretty accurate from my read, does it just hit you as like, I can't believe someone would think that? Does it seem that foreign to you, or do you sort of understand why some of these Christians are going in this direction? What's your reflection on that as you hear it all?
I sometimes just think it's sort of a shame that people end up sort of with the piece I've always known, I guess, from the theology I grew up with, and that's just Christianity for me. So
yeah,
it doesn't shock me, but yeah,
right. So Pastor Shuping, cards on the table. We say this all the time. We are confessional Lutherans. The purpose of the podcast, though, isn't necessarily to market that. I mean, we certainly hope people will find what we have found here, but we believe that kind of this is tantamount to just what the Christian faith is. It is not just an expression of it, although it is. It's not less than that, but it's more than that. And that's at the heart of it, isn't it? Because for me, anyway, that's exactly what I finally realized I was getting into when I got here. The essential, and not essentials in the way a lot of evangelicals mean it, where you just love Jesus and that's enough, but the essentials being made the essentials and starting from there. And this is the first time in 50-something years that I found that. I don't know if that was your case also.
Yeah, well, it was, picking up some of the thread from my journey. I'm sitting here, and I have, the elders at the Reformed Baptist Church, or the deacons, at the Reformed Baptist Church, kind of talking to me about X, and I have the Eastern Orthodox, pastor or priest talking to me about Y, and I'm like, how do I discern between these two? And so the Eastern Orthodox person would point to history. He'd point to tradition. He'd say, look, we aren't crazy. We didn't make this all up yesterday. And I fell for the rhetoric that the Western churches have no historical grounding. They'll, for example, in the East, they'll often say that, these churches started in 1517, or these churches started in the 16th century, or where was the church for, 1,000 years, or where was the church for 1,500 years? And I didn't know how to resist that claim. It just was like, yeah, that sounds very reasonable. Look, they trace themselves to the 95 Theses, and or these Reformed Baptists trace themselves to the London Baptist Confession of 1689. And so that must be when their churches started. Of course, I learned later that, they wouldn't say that the Eastern Orthodox Church started in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. They wouldn't say that the church started in 451 at Chalcedon. They would just say those are like key moments in the history of the church where doctrinal error had gotten to the point where they had to clarify and refine theological terminology to protect and guard and communicate the truth, preserve it to communicate for future generations. That's the claim of the Lutherans. Like, we didn't start in 1530 with the Augsburg Confession. We didn't start in 1580 with the Book of Concord. We were just clarifying doctrine because there had been so much error that had crept up in the churches. So I didn't know how to dismantle the argument 16 years ago when I was just getting started. And so
Yeah.
I fell for it.
Yeah, well, understandably, I think. There must have been something else, though, about orthodoxy that you found at the time that was valuable and good, and you appreciated, and even now you still think of it as a good thing. What might some of those be?
Um, Having an identity that's rooted in history and continuity was very, very valuable to me. If Jesus Christ started something and his apostles and disciples received that and transmitted that, I want to be able to stand in continuity. That was hugely, hugely important to me, that there's like a chain of transmission of doctrine and practice. So you have orthodoxy and orthopraxy, like right doctrine, right practice, or right praise, right worship. And so that was hugely important to me. Another aspect of it, though, because I was so unformed yet in terms of theological training or tradition, I was very fascinated by their mysticism, their Jesus prayer mysticism, or what they call Hechysasm, which is, inner quiet, inner stillness. I was very fascinated by that. One of their most famous texts, ironically, it was only published in like the 17 or 1800s, is a text called the Philokalia. But that text collects texts that go all the way back to like 400 or 500, like the 5th century, to like the 400s, maybe even the 300s. And so it collected all those texts. So I was like, wow, here's like an identifiable tradition of going deeper than what all I understood about Christianity was happy clappy. That was all that I was given in these youth groups and these non-denominational churches, was just kind of like this happy clappy kind of thing. And then all of a sudden I'm reading these texts from like the Christians writing in the 400s, 500s, 600s, 700s that have like this really deep theology, but also a deep spiritual psychology. And that was hugely important to me.
Yeah. So we're going to, just so everybody knows, cover this on 2 episodes here. So we have a lot to talk about. You still got time for that, right, Pastor Joshua? Because we started a little late. You good? Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. So, and by the way, folks, if you hear it, yes, apparently where Pastor Joshua is, there is a raging thunderstorm going on. We can hear it. So
yes.
hopefully
good.
hopefully you're safe. It sounds like it's pretty intense, but it's just, I think the thing that I love about what you're talking about is it tracks so much with what I went through in many ways, minus the specific group of Christians you went with, and I was never a pastor or a priest. But there's a lot to what motivated you to move in that direction that also did for me. But like me, at some point, you started to have concerns. So tell us about that. How long, and were these all of a sudden? Were they creeping doubts that just sort of grew? Tell me more about that.
Well, and by the way, what is your education seminary wise? What's the rigors of Orthodox seminary? Because you obviously went beyond just curious and membership. You moved into the priesthood.
Yeah. So I got 2 master's degrees. I got a master's in divinity at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. And then I stayed for a 4th year and completed a master's in theology, got a THM. And so, and that, ironically, in seminary was where I had some of my bubbles burst. Because outside of seminary, in the local Eastern Orthodox churches, it's really a theological quagmire. You can believe almost anything. You really can. You have no idea that that's what you're doing.
Huh.
But you can like this church father, or you can like that church father, even though they may stress or give a picture of completely different kinds of spirituality. You might like this theologian or that theologian. So there's like huge antipathies and or dislikes of Western Christendom. So they'll go all the way back to Augustine, and they'll say Augustine, some of them will go all the way back to Augustine and say Augustine ruined everything. It almost gets to the point where it becomes like a cliche sort of joke, where it's like, like you're driving in traffic and you get a red light and it's like, oh, that red light, that's Augustine's fault. Or that's the Filioque's fault,
Yeah.
that there's all these red lights.
But that's what we do. We lock onto one thing that's not unimportant. And I'm not going to say Lutherans don't do it. Like the Reformed, they really hone in on Romans 9 and sovereignty. It's a crucial thing through everything they do. And we Lutherans have some of our own as well. And all of us will claim, well, no, we're just locking on to what the scriptures say. But we all have a tendency to just pick that one thing that kind of we really press the gas pedal on. So that's not surprising at all. So when you say the bubble began to burst, meaning that you wondered why there was such inconsistency from seminary to the local churches, or what?
Yeah, so for example, in a lot of popular Western forms of Eastern Christianity or Eastern Orthodoxy, they'll have, let's say, this antipathy towards Western Christendom. So one of the things they'll say, that's very legalistic. They're so legalistic, and their view of the atonement is very legalistic. In fact, this whole idea that God had to vent his wrath on the Son is just like this divine child abuse, and they just justify all of these evils and false doctrines. And you please come into the East, come into the East. We have theosis, we have transformation, we have this kind of exalted sanctification, and there's maybe not even an atonement. Jesus just defeated death. He defeated death so that you could have eternal life. And so you can find wide pockets in the Eastern Orthodox Church where they don't even really affirm that there was a substitutionary element to the atonement at all. That he just went and defeated death on our behalf and essentially just gave us the capacity through his grace to be able to kind of follow him into immortality if we pray enough, if we're transformed by the church enough. And I stress that "if" enough because it's almost like that's the part that gets muted when they say that. They don't realize there's an anxiety there.
That is the heart of it for me. Everything in every other tradition that I had been a part of, even the big box evangelical, what you call the happy clappy, it all came down to Jesus saves, but. And whenever that happens, whenever the word "but" gets stuck on the end of that, the only thing that matters in the equation at that point is whatever you're saying after that word. And that's until I want to be careful how I say this, because I'm not saying Lutherans are the only ones that really believe in true justification through faith alone. But I do know that I hear that come out in the wash in pastors' sermons and in just in the way we approach things more than any other time. There's not so much emphasis on, okay, what we have called syncretism. God did his part. Now you have to do your part. It's more an emphasis on this is what Christ has done for you. We tend to keep our eye on that ball, and we walk together on that, where it sounds to me like in the Eastern Orthodox Church, there really is a lot of just, well, you do this and we do that, and no one's really checking on to make sure we're all faithful. That is quite the storm. Are you all right over there? You gonna be okay?
Yeah, it's beautiful. No, it's great.
Yeah.
We had a nice lightning strike just recently, just a moment ago, and we haven't had rain in a bit really. So I guess we did maybe a few days ago, but had been dry for a while.
Well, if you disappear on us, we'll know why. You got hit by a lightning bolt or something. I pray that doesn't happen.
Well,
pray for us and our.
This is a good time for Pastor Shuping to tell us where he's at and what church you can be found at.
Yeah, well, I'm in Arkansas, Russellville, Arkansas. Great city to live in. We're maybe about 30,000 people or something like that. So it's big enough to have everything. We've got a super Walmart, so if you come over here, you can find everything you need.
But you have Walmarts everywhere in Arkansas, though, like on every street corner. It seems like that's kind of where it's at.
Yeah, in Florida, it's 7-Elevens on every street corner. In Arkansas, it's Walmarts. But no, we have a nice tech university here, beautiful church that we're at, St. John's. We've been here for over 100 years, and it's just a good, faithful community. And Russellville's great. In Arkansas, we have all 4 seasons. We're already kind of leaving winter, getting into spring, so the weather is typically in the 70s right now.
Yeah, we hear that. Yeah.
And in Florida, though, it's like summer 6 months out of the year, and then like summer again for another 3 months.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Pastor Curt, what else are you, because we're getting close to our wrap-up time for this episode, what else are you curious about in this phase of Pastor Joshua's journey? And we've got much more to talk about. We'll do that on the next episode.
What I see in society, and maybe you guys see the same thing, is there's a lot of, especially young men that follow kind of Pastor Shuping's path, deciding there's got to be something more. I want something deeper. And what seems to be happening is a move toward curiosity about the ancient church that they identify as being either Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy. And so there's a fascination, and that fascination may be more emotional or mystical or what have you. And so I love that people are looking for something deeper. I would love for them to know that that they don't have to hopscotch over Lutheranism, for instance, to get there. And so we'll talk about that maybe in the next episode or so forth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we wrap up this one, Pastor Joshua, any parting thoughts that you might want to share?
Yeah, I think a lot of the difficulties that people will sometimes have growing up in evangelical churches is if they hear the gospel, it becomes almost so familiar that they start asking if there's something more with a kind of anxiety, because it almost can become difficult to sit in the freedom of the gospel. The flesh is so persuasive. The flesh's internal voice in our head sounds like our own wisdom to ourselves. It's like our own inner voice is very persuasive. And so when we start feeling that sense of restlessness and we start asking, must there be more? I think we get trapped in that. And instead of turning into the gospel, and really, I think sometimes people need to learn how to sit in the fire of freedom.
Yeah. Boy, there's so much truth in that. And the plot twist here is also, I think a lot of American evangelicals are not actually getting the gospel. They're getting something that sort of resembles it, but isn't quite it. And that makes what you're talking about even more salient. So, well, we are out of time for this one, but next time we are for sure going to continue with Pastor Joshua Schooping of Arkansas, who is telling us about his journey from evangelicalism towards Eastern Orthodoxy, even going so far as to be a priest, and then the Lord led him to confessional Lutheranism. We're going to talk about what it was like to make that transition, why Lutheranism, and the most important part, and I don't even think this has to be, like, if you arrive at a journey that's different than ours, but you come to this conclusion, we would say amen. Is Christ and the gospel clear to you? Is that where you're at? And that's what we're really here to talk about. So that happened for Pastor Joshua. That has happened for me. For Pastor Curt, seemed to have happened his whole life. So we'll talk more about that. Anchored in Christ is supported by people like you. It just takes a little bit of effort to share an episode with someone that you think, this resonates. I think this is something you'd like. It doesn't take much time at all to do that, and it really helps. When you do things, it's so silly to me. I don't really like it, but it's the way it is in this crazy world we live in. When you do things like click the thumbs up on a video, and when you go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you've come across it and you're like, yeah, this is good, that helps. It even honestly helps if there's something you don't like about it and you leave a thumbs down if that's an option for the video, because it just tells YouTube people are paying attention to this. It really makes a difference. So do us a solid, subscribe and like if you can. It makes more difference than you think. And if you can help us financially, anchoredpod.org is a great way to do that. Whatever the amount might be, we receive it gratefully, and it really does make a difference. Gentlemen, thank you. We'll talk next time.
Thank you.